Last-minute shake-up at 5:30 a.m., laundry situation not good. And when your focus is on helping your clients, it's easy to forget about yourself. But NASM knows trainers.
Morning, Ryan. It's okay.
And staying in front of the day isn't always as
Thanks,
simple
Ryan.
as 1,
What's
2,
up?
3. So when the unexpected has you pressing pause,
What's the latest on creatine?
I'm going to get back to you on that.
let NASM1 help you press play. Visit NASM.org to sign up for a membership.
You're listening to the NASM-CPT Podcast with Rick Richey, winner of the Share Care Emmy Award for Social Storytelling and the official podcast of the National Academy of Sports Medicine.
Hey, y'all, and welcome to the NASM-CPT Podcast. My name is Rick Richey, and when I was a kid, and I was in fourth grade, well, I was going into fifth grade, so that kind of time between fourth and fifth grade, I had put on a few LBs. I was getting a little chunky, and I remember I'd go to church, and the people there would be like, "Oh, I remember when I was your age, and you'll grow out of it, and you'll grow out of it." And I didn't know it was a big deal until people were telling me that I'll grow out of it, which means that should go away, and maybe don't worry about it. And I didn't know to be. So that summer, going into fifth grade, put on a little bit of weight. I was a little chunky. And I remember going into fifth grade. It was my first day of school. And it was a small town, Tuscumbia, Alabama. I went to Colbert Heights Elementary School. And I go into my first day of class, and I'm wearing my favorite shirt from when I was in fourth grade. But my favorite shirt from when I was in fourth grade did not do me any favors. It was too small for me, and it had these broad horizontal stripes. And I walk into class, and people are already there. And I remember very distinctly, because the trauma unto this day, when Tamika Johnson jumped up from the back of the class and she yells the top of her lungs as loud as she can, laughing her face off. "Look, everybody, Rick got boobies." She didn't say boobies, but I was mortified. I crossed my arms, covering myself. I'm so embarrassed. And, I remember, first of all, how much that bothered me. But I also, at some point, remember watching an old movie with this guy named Bruce Lee in it. And Bruce Lee was not the hero for me in this movie. It was actually his nemesis, a guy named Bolo. And this guy, actor in the movie, was called Bolo, but in his name, I think, is from Hong Kong, Bolo Young. And he was a bodybuilder. And he was a big man, and he had pecs. And I'm not sure that I've ever paid attention to it before when I was in fifth grade. This is the first time that was brought to my attention. And I thought to myself, if anyone ever says what Tamika Johnson said to me, Tamika, I'm fine now. Just so you know, if you're listening to this and you're like, I was Colbert Heights in Tuscumbia, Alabama. I remember Rick Richey. He's still harping about that time. I said, I'm not. It's a good story, though, because it was one of the things where I was like, if anybody ever says that about me in the future, it will be because I have pecs, not what she was laughing at. And so I remember wanting to work hard and have this kind of cathartic moment of exercise because I wanted pecs. And I started to develop pecs. I did push-ups every day. We had an old bench in a detached garage that I found myself stuck under the bar of that thing so many times. You should not let fifth graders just go work out, or at least someone so determined for it like me. And I had to go to failure every time. My push-ups were to failure every time. I had the closet in that pulled down, the ladder that pulled down to the attic. It was in the closet in my room. And I would do dips every night before bed. And I needed to grow pecs. pecs were a big deal to me. And I remember I grew them, and I went through middle school and I had pecs, and going into high school, I wanted to play football. By the way, no sense in somebody as small as me playing football, even as a freshman. But I went in and I met with the doctor, and the doctor was concerned that I was injecting steroids into my pecs because everything else on my body, I was so tiny. I was it's just no development in anything but pecs. I was obsessed. I was obsessed with pecs. And my gratitude to the one who berated me in front of my classroom. But then I was concerned that I have pecs, but nobody would know the difference. Kind of like when you gain weight when you're pregnant, but you're not pregnant enough for people to be like, oh, you're pregnant, you just must be gaining weight. And I know this because every woman I've ever trained and my wife, we've been through this 3 times. I wish I was more pregnant looking so people didn't just assume it's weight gain. I understand it. I felt that way also about my pecs. Pecs were a big deal to me, and pecs a big deal to a lot of people. And if you don't understand, you don't understand. But if you're in the game and you understand why bench press is International Chest Day, you know what's up. So let's talk about the pecs. But before we do, I want to say thank you so much for listening. Like, subscribe, share with your fitness friends and family, and leave a review. All of that stuff allows people to better find the show and learn from it. So let's get into the topic. Also, I want to give a shout out to my producer, Eric Sorensen, who helps put all of these together for all of the shows on NASM. So, Eric, thank you. Now, let's get into the etymology of pec major. So the word pectoralis major, it comes from the Latin word pectus, that means chest or breast, and major is another Latin word meaning large or greater. So the pectoralis major literally means the larger muscle of the chest, because there is a pectoralis minor, which would mean it is the smaller muscle of the chest. Now let's get into origin and insertion, which we've moved away from that terminology. It still comes out of my mouth sometimes, so I apologize for that. It's more of what we refer to as a proximal and distal attachment. So the pecs have attachment points, and we mostly think about the pecs being attached to the sternum. And it's true, the pec attaches to the entire sternum, but it really has other branches to it as well. So the pec does attach to the sternum, but it also has a clavicular component to it. So if you follow the sternum up and then you get to the manubrium, which is the upper part of the sternum, and that connects to the clavicle. The clavicle is the collarbone there, the sternum, the center of the chest. And so it attaches to that medial portion, about the medial third of the clavicle. It goes down the entire sternum, but then it also has these costal attachments. Costal means what? Those are the ribs. So the costal attachments down below. And so from this, we see actually the fibers fan out. This is a fan-shaped muscle because it doesn't just run in one direction. It runs along the clavicle and into the sternum, and then down onto the 6 costal cartilages down on the ribs. So they also attach in different places because of the aponeurosis, can attach to the external oblique muscles. But this is important because this is the anchor point for the muscle. Then it crosses over the shoulder joint. So all of those muscles, as they fan down, they start to move together into one tendon. They cross over the shoulder joint, and it attaches into a place called the bicipital groove. There's a greater tubercle and a lesser tubercle of the humerus, and there's a groove called the bicipital groove, or the intertubercle groove, which is the groove in between the tubercles, which one's the greater and the lesser, and it attaches there. Also interesting, relatively close to the exact same spot that your lats attach into. So this is important because the lats and the pecs really have a lot in common. So as the pecs cross over into this distal attachment, and we know it crosses over the shoulder joint, but let's get more specific with the shoulder joint. The shoulder joint specifically, not the shoulder girdle, the shoulder joint is also oftentimes referred to as the glenohumeral joint. Now that's very specific because the humerus and the glenofossa is that little area on the scapula, the shoulder blade, that comes around and creates a little space, a little gap, and the humerus fits into that space. Now, it's not snug. Like the hip has a ball and socket joint. This is also a ball and socket joint, but it is not ball in socket. It's ball and socket because it's not in. Like the hip is really connected. It makes it even deeper with the acetabulum, and it's deep. But the thing is, you get a lot more range of motion at your shoulder joint. Somebody just picks their legs up and starts circumducting their leg the way I'm doing my shoulder. I'd be like, somebody help them. That is way too bendy. You need to get your butt over to the New York City Ballet and the American Ballet Theater. You're spinning your leg around like that. First of all, I think it's dangerous. Also, the hips need to be a lot more stable because there's a lot more weight on them. The shoulder's less stable, much more mobile, and it's like that for a reason. All right, y'all, let's give a shout out to the sponsor here. This episode of the NASM-CPT Podcast is brought to you by NASM-1, the membership for trainers and coaches. Members enjoy unlimited access to hundreds of career resources. Get the Edge app to schedule and program clients. Enjoy half off all certifications and specializations. Access to free CEUs and more. All of this for just $35 a month. Go to nasm.org/membership to learn more about NASM-1. So we know the pecs from their multiple proximal attachments cross over the glenohumeral joint, and they attach to this little area on the superior medial side of the humerus. Now, that's going to give rise to what that muscle does in concentric joint action. It also identifies what it can help stabilize and what it decelerates, which is what functional anatomy is. The neuromuscular system's ability to produce, reduce, and dynamically stabilize in multiple planes at various speeds in a safe and coordinated fashion. Save that for later. Rules of muscle, because we know it. In order for us to identify what a muscle does, we have to lay down some rules. First rule is muscles only pull. They do not push. Muscles only pull. Based on that sliding filament theory with the actin and myosin slide over each other, the proximal and distal attachments get closer together. That is a concentric contraction. They pull. They do not push. Even though you say, hey, how do you work your pecs? You say, you push things away from you, like a push up and a bench press. However, the muscle, the movement away from you is called a push, but the actual muscle itself is pulling the arm closer to the center of the body. So that's rule number one. Muscles only pull, they don't push. Here they go. Muscles only contract or relax. This is known as the all or none principle. A muscle fiber, when it is innervated and facilitated, fires with 100% of its force. Rick, that doesn't make any sense. How does it fire with 100% of its force? Because sometimes I go and I lift something that's light. Why is it not every time I lift it, I throw it? It's because your brain doesn't innervate the muscles that it doesn't need to. Sometimes you accidentally request more muscle than is needed. I know that happens ever since I get a milk out of the refrigerator, and I don't know that the kids have been drinking the milk, so I had gone and expected to pick up a full gallon of milk, and I yank a quarter gallon of milk up and I bang it into the top of the refrigerator, and everybody turns around like, what are you doing? And my wife was like, what? I have enough trouble with the kids. I don't need this type of tomfoolery. And I was like, what? I don't know what happened. I will say this, that happened one time. Again, it's another church reference when I was a kid, when they handed the little grape juices, right, and then the tray, and they never let me touch that tray. So I just assumed it was really heavy. And when they finally let me hand the tray to the next person, I spilled every bit of the juice. I did get in trouble, but it didn't make sense that I got in trouble. I didn't know. I was just so strong. All or none principle, contract or relax. I contracted too many muscles and put too much power behind it. Muscles must have at least 2 attachments and cross at least 1 joint. That's a rule. Got to have 2 attachments, cross 1 joint. If you have a muscle does not cross a joint, it doesn't move anything, and therefore that muscle will atrophy until it is no more, because you have to have a purpose for it. Now we are talking specifically skeletal muscle here. All right. So these 2 points are known as origin insertion, but also proximal and distal attachment. Those are my preferences. Now, muscles only directly move the joints they cross. They can indirectly move other joints, but they only directly move the joints they cross. Muscles work best in the direction of their fibers. Well, here's what's interesting about the pecs and why I bring this up is because the direction of fiber for the muscles in the pec can change the movement. So then you can have preferential focus on one part of the muscle. Now, I'm going to get back to that in a moment. And then there's a soft rule. The insertion moves toward the origin, but that is a soft rule because the proximal attachment can move to the distal attachment. It's just a lot easier. Usually our proximal body stays still and we move the distal parts closer to us. But that's not always the case, because sometimes we can move our body closer to the arm, for instance. And that would be an example, like a pull-up. My proximal side is moving. My distal side is affixed to something. All right, so that's a soft rule, but it is a generality for a soft rule. Now, we've got the joint actions here. We've got the glenohumeral joint, and it does primarily 3 joint actions, but it also works not just cardinally in that plane of motion, but it can work through different planes of motion because of all the things that it does. Now, the joint actions primarily we'll look at are, number 1, big important one, horizontal adduction. Now that's kind of bench press, looking at my arms out to the side, and I horizontally adduct. So my axis of rotation is going to be a superior to inferior axis of rotation through my shoulder. My arm is out to the side, so I abduct it about 90 degrees. And then I press forward. Well, a lot of times people think that might be doing flexion when you do a chest press, because the hand is moving forward and backwards, but it's not hand action, it is joint action. So you look at the shoulder joint and you'll see that that's a horizontal adduction, or transverse adduction also. There's also, and that's going to be in the horizontal or transverse plane. It can do flexion. You can bring your elbows to your side. I see this in yoga with a lot of yoga push-ups. The elbows are stuck in against the body and they'll do push-ups that way. That is shoulder flexion. And yes, that very much still works your pecs. Why? Because your pecs also shoulder flex. Your shoulders, your deltoids do as well, but your pecs are big shoulder flexors. And then the third one, we're going to go back to the horizontal plane. So if we did flexion, that's going to be sagittal plane. Flexion is in sagittal plane. The third one is internal rotation. So we can do internal or medial rotation. That's also in the transverse or horizontal plane. So we get 2 major joint actions in the transverse horizontal plane and 1 major joint action in the sagittal plane. And that is what the muscle does concentrically. That means as the muscle shortens. There's a secondary kind of muscle action that can happen too. If my arms are overhead and I pull my arm down, my pecs can actually assist with adduction and with extension, but I don't want to confuse anybody. So let's just set that aside, especially if you are studying for a test. Don't say that one. It is like a secondary movement. It is not a major movement. Major movements for the pecs, horizontal adduction flexion, and internal rotation. Okay, so horizontal adduction, that's a bench press, barbell bench press. The flexion would be things like doing the yoga push-up, and then internal rotation, think arm wrestling. Right? So I'm arm wrestling somebody. My pecs are a huge contributor to my ability to arm wrestle. But if I can preferentially focus on different parts of my pec, we've got to be clear what that means. Because some people say, oh, good, because I want to work this is what they say. This isn't Rick talking. I want to work the cleavage. I want it to be bigger in the center of my chest. All right, cool. And some people say, well, I want to work the outer part of my chest. So you see it stick off of my body a little bit. I'm working my pecs that way. That's not how it works, because you cannot preferentially work a muscle along the fiber. But I've got multiple fibers and they move in different directions. So I can work my upper fibers preferentially. I can maybe preferentially work my middle fibers. I can preferentially work these lower fibers right here. But you can't work the inner pec versus the outer pec, because it's like taking a rubber band and stretching it and saying, I only want to stretch the one closer to my left, the side closer to my left hand. And you can pull your left hand and it's going to stretch the same all the way through. So that's how a muscle fiber works. Like you can't stretch it. You can't shorten just an area along the fiber. However, if those fibers multiple fibers line up in different directions, you can preferentially focus on them. What does that mean? Well, that's when you get into things like an incline chest press, a flat chest press or a bench press, and a decline chest press or bench press. Because as I do an incline chest press, yes, I'm going to work my deltoids a little bit more, but I'm also working my upper pecs, the fibers of my upper pecs, a little bit more. It is a preferential activation of those muscles versus the lower ones, because as my arm goes up, and because my pecs, lower pecs pull down, they are being inhibited by the joint action, reciprocal inhibition. It's still assisting with the horizontal component of it, the horizontal adduction, but it is not contributing in that direction very much. Now, a flat bench will work upper fibers pretty well, those center fibers pretty well, the lower fibers pretty well. And then you go into a decline press, and you decline press, I can even press down and squeeze my pecs. And then I feel kind of, it's still a little active, but it's also a little squishy. But the middle of my pecs, they're very firm. The bottom part of my pecs, very firm as I press into that position. Why? Because my upper pecs don't work as much. They are reciprocally inhibited because it moves away from an angle that they shorten. That is how the pecs kind of work. And that is why there are things like I can do an incline press, preferentially focus on this part of the muscle. Decline, yes, preferentially focus on this part of the muscle. But just because you're doing deep flies or you're bringing it all the way across in a cable cross doesn't mean you work the outer pec more or you work the inner pecs more. And I get this a lot. Yeah, but Rick, when I do a big stretch, I feel it on the outer part more. And I went, Well, as we hear in politics all the time today, feelings aren't facts. So the stretch in the pec, yeah, you feel it, but it's not just stretching there. It's stretching everywhere. And when I shorten it, Rick, I feel like a crossover, and I'm crossing, my elbows are almost touching in front of me as I cross over, and I really feel the cleavage line. Well, feeling it doesn't mean it works that muscle. It means that you are squishing the muscle into the bone at the insertion point. And yeah, you're definitely going to feel that, but you are not working that part of the muscle more. All right, good. I hope that helps. I hope you enjoyed the exploration of the pectoralis major, and I appreciate you being here. Like, subscribe, share with your fitness friends and family, and leave a review, 5-star if you don't mind. I always appreciate that. Plus, leave some feedback, because that feedback helps me better understand what it is you like about the show, what topics you enjoy listening. And if you also want to tell me a specific topic, hit me up. You can do so on Instagram at dr.rickrichey or email me, rick.richey@nasm.org. Y'all keep inspiring people to fitness. Thanks for listening. This has been the NASM CPT Podcast.